Welcome to Podcast Listen and Learn English, and you've tuned in for another deep dive. Today, we're tackling something a lot of you have written in about how to actually think in English, you know?
Yeah.
It's that point where you're not translating in your head, but just letting your thoughts flow in the language.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mental hurdle to get over, but when it clicks, it's so rewarding.
For sure. And we've got this guide, How to Think in English. It's packed with insights. So what's the mission for today? Our listeners want to ditch that translator in their brain and become more fluent. Basically, think in English as easily as they think in their native language.
Ambitious, but doable. And the guide really stresses why this change is so important. It's not just about sounding more fluent.
Right, it goes deeper than that. It changes how you understand and even your confidence level.
Exactly. The guide lists fluency, faster understanding, and increased confidence as the top 3 benefits. But let's break down why those happen. Think of it this way. When you're translating, your brain is doing double the work. It's like reading a book and having to summarize each paragraph before you can move on.
Yeah, that sounds exhausting.
It is.
No wonder conversations can feel awkward when you're stuck in translation mode. So thinking directly in English is like finally reading that book straight through and getting the full meaning instantly.
Right. And that speed boost doesn't just help with speaking, it also helps with listening too. Your brain is already ready for English so you can understand what you hear much faster.
No more feeling lost in the middle of a conversation or struggling to follow a movie. But what about that confidence boost? Is it just because you're not stumbling over words anymore?
Well, that's part of it for sure. But picture this. You're in a meeting and someone asks you a question. Since you're thinking in English already, you can answer immediately and clearly. That quick thinking and accurate speaking naturally builds your confidence.
It's like that fake it till you make it idea, but for language. By acting like you already think in English, you start to believe it, and the confidence comes naturally.
That's a great way to put it. But of course, there are going to be some hurdles, right? This guide doesn't try to hide that. If you're listening and you've hit a wall with this before, it's totally normal.
Yeah, it's like trying to run a marathon without any training. You need the right tools and strategies. And this guide has a bunch of them, 10 to be exact.
And it talks about those common roadblocks like relying too much on translation. We all do it at first. Or having a limited vocabulary. That feeling of not having the right words can be so frustrating. And then there's the big one, fear of making mistakes.
Oh yeah, fear can be paralyzing. You get so worried about sounding silly that you don't even try to speak, let alone think in English. But the guide's message is really encouraging. These challenges are all part of the process, and there are ways to overcome them.
Definitely. And those 10 strategies are like stepping stones.
Okay, so strategy number 1 is label your environment. Sounds pretty basic, right? But it's all about building those direct links in your brain between objects and their English names. The guide suggests literally labeling things around your house, your table, your coffee mug, everything.
What's really interesting here is that it uses how our brains naturally learn language. We connect words with the things they represent. Babies don't learn by memorizing dictionaries. They learn by seeing and hearing the names of things around them.
So this strategy is like recreating that immersive environment, even if you're not surrounded by native English speakers. And it's easy to do. Just grab some sticky notes and go crazy. I might even try this myself.
I would love to see that. Now, to build on that, there's narrate your actions. You basically become your own commentator. Brushing your teeth. I'm brushing my teeth. Making breakfast. I'm making breakfast.
I can see how this would keep English running in the background of your mind. It's turning those everyday routines into tiny language learning opportunities. But wouldn't that get tiring after a while?
It might feel a little strange at first, but you'd be surprised how quickly it turns into a habit. And it's about making those connections in your brain stronger. The more you use English in any way, the more natural it becomes.
And that leads us to a strategy I'm really curious about. Learn vocabulary in context. The guide is really firm that this is way better than just memorizing word lists.
And there's a good reason for that. Think about how you remember stories. You don't remember every single word. You remember the plot, the characters, the feelings. All those things give context to the words and make them stick.
So instead of just learning the word happy, I should learn it in a sentence like, I felt happy when I saw my friend. That way I'm not just memorizing the definition, I'm understanding how to actually use it.
Exactly. And you're creating a more vivid picture in your mind, making it easier to remember. The word happy gets connected to that feeling of seeing your friend, not just a boring dictionary definition.
Okay, I'm starting to see how powerful context is. What other strategies does the guide recommend for making those vocabulary connections stick?
So we've already found some great tips. Labeling things around us, narrating our day, and understanding how important context is for learning vocabulary.
Right.
Now, we're getting into techniques that really make you actively use English in your thoughts. This next one might sound a little silly at first, but it works really well. Talk to yourself.
I have to admit, this is one I've always been a little self-conscious about. Like, will people think I'm crazy if they hear me talking to myself in English?
I get it,
Uh,
but think about it this way. You are your own best language partner. You're always available, never judgmental, and you can practice anything you want.
that's a good point. It's like having a safe space to try new phrases, work on pronunciation, and maybe even have imaginary arguments in English to get those emotions going.
Exactly. And it really tackles that fear of making mistakes. When you're by yourself, there's no pressure to be perfect. You can mess up, fix yourself, and play around with the language without worrying about what other people think.
So it's like working out your fluency muscles in private before you go to the gym of real-life conversations. I like that. But what about when we do get stuck, even when we're just talking to ourselves?
That's where the next strategy comes in limit translation. This one is about getting away from that crutch of translating everything back and forth between languages in your head.
But how do you do that? I mean, it's almost like an instinct to go to that translation dictionary in our minds when we see a new word or phrase.
It's a hard habit to break, but the trick is to focus on the context. Instead of translating right away, try to figure out the meaning from the words around it, the situation, or even the tone of voice if you're listening.
So it's like training our brains to be detectives, using clues to solve the mystery of what it means, and the more we do that, the less we'll need those mental dictionaries.
Right. Your brain becomes super adaptable when you challenge it this way. It starts to pick up patterns in English, make connections between words, and eventually those meanings just pop up without needing translation.
It's like those magic eye pictures, where you have to unfocus your eyes to see the hidden image. Once your brain figures out the trick, it sees the image instantly.
That's a perfect comparison. It's about retraining how you see things, and it's amazing what the brain can do. Now, once you're getting comfortable with these strategies, it's time to step things up with thinking goals.
Goals, like setting times just to think in English, that sounds kind of intense.
It's not about turning into a robot that only thinks in English all day. It's about making those dedicated pockets of time where you try to think in English.
So could I pick, let's say, 30 minutes during my commute and just focus on thinking about my day, my plans, my to-do list, all in English?
Exactly. Or it could be while you're cooking dinner, taking a walk, anything where you can have that conversation in your head without distractions. The guide says that consistency is key here. Even short bursts of focused thinking time can make a big difference.
And this connects really well with the next strategy, practice with others. It's like taking those internal English conversations and putting them out into the world.
Exactly. Joining those English conversation groups, finding communities online, even just chatting with a friend who speaks English, it all helps to make those thinking skills stronger.
It's like going from practicing scales on your own to playing music with a band. You have to adapt, react, and think on your feet in real time.
And just like in a band, you don't have to be a pro to enjoy it. It's all about connecting with others, pushing yourself out of your comfort zone, and knowing that mistakes are just part of how we learn.
Speaking of making mistakes,
Yeah.
I think this is where be patient comes in. We all want results quickly, but learning a language is like a marathon, not a sprint. And the guide reminds us that it's okay to have setbacks and feel frustrated sometimes.
Definitely. It's so important to celebrate the small wins, acknowledge the challenges, and remember why you're doing this in the first place. Because when you get it, that feeling of thinking in English, expressing yourself fluently, and connecting with others on a deeper level, it's so rewarding.
It's like finally reaching the top of a mountain you've been climbing. And who knows, maybe you'll find you enjoy the climb even more than the view from the top.
I love that. And if you're enjoying the journey with us, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and leave a comment telling us what you're finding helpful.
Welcome back to Podcast Listen and Learn English. We're wrapping up our deep dive into thinking in English, and I'm feeling really pumped after going over all those strategies.
It's pretty amazing how just changing your mindset can unlock so much potential when it comes to language learning. And the guide doesn't stop at theory, it actually gives you a practical exercise to help solidify those techniques.
I'm all about putting things into action. What's the exercise?
It's a simple 3-step routine you can fit into your everyday life. The first step is observation. Take a few minutes to look around your room and describe everything you see in English.
So it's kind of like label your environment, but with more detail. So instead of just saying table, I would say something like, it's a big wooden table with 4 chairs and a vase of flowers in the middle.
Exactly. You're really working those descriptive muscles and putting your vocabulary to work. And it's amazing how much you notice about your surroundings when you do
It's
this.
like seeing your own home with a fresh perspective. What's step 2?
Step 2 is planning. Set aside some time to think about your day ahead and plan everything out mentally, but in English. What do you need to get done? Who are you going to talk to? What decisions do you have to make?
So it's kind of like rehearsing those conversations and thought processes in your head, almost like a practice run for real interactions. This really connects with the narrate your action strategy, but focus on the future.
Exactly. You're basically prepping your brain to think in English even for situations you haven't faced yet. And lastly, step 3 is reflection. At the end of the day, take a little time to go over what you did, how you felt, and what you learned, all in English.
Like an end-of-day journal entry, but with a language learning spin. I love how this 3-step exercise ties together all those strategies we talked about: observation, narration, reflection. It's really clever.
The goal is to make thinking in English a natural part of your daily life. And that brings us to our final thought. Now that you have all these tools and techniques, what's one small change you can commit to this week to start shifting your thinking into English?
That's the challenge for our listeners. It could be something as simple as labeling a few things around your house,
Yeah.
narrating your morning routine, or giving that 3-step exercise a try for a couple of days.
Don't forget, even small steps, if you do them regularly, can lead to big changes. And if you're feeling motivated and want to share what you're committing to, head over to the comments. We love to hear from you.
And if you've enjoyed this deep dive into the world of language learning, make sure you hit that subscribe button and share this episode with your fellow language lovers. We'll be back next time with another deep dive into a topic you're passionate about.
Until then, keep practicing, keep learning, and keep exploring the language you love.